You are listening to Build What's Next, Digital Product Perspectives. I'm your host, Josh Lucas, and at Method, our vision is to connect technology with humanity for a simpler digital future. Join us as we speak with leading experts to discuss industry trends, best practices, and emerging technology that can help you and your organization craft better digital products and experiences. This episode is from a tech talk we hosted in our Method office. We host these discussions once a month, and if you like what you hear, we would love for you to join us live either in person or virtually. You can find more details about our Tech Talk schedule at method.com. Now, let's jump in.
I want to tell you a little bit today about Find Out Why and using jobs to be done as a way to help build better products and better marketing. Okay. Little bit about me. So this is where so first of all, I have stage fright. I'm going to get over it, but this step scares the shit out of me, right? Because it's like, they kept saying like, I got these tape marks between here and here. And I'm used to being like, hey, I want to come up over here, right? So the video might kind of go away every once in a while. But so first of all, I'm an engineer, right? Half the room is going, oh, another engineer, right? But I've worked on over 3,500 different products, and I'm the I'll say the co-architect of the jobs to be done theory. The one thing you need to know is that my mom would tell you I was an engineer out of the womb. I was breaking things by the time I was 2. I was literally one of those high energy kids who asked why 1,000, like to the point where my mom goes like, if somebody gets within 3 feet of you, please go talk to them, not me, right? But I end up getting 3 close head brain injuries for some of the products that I tried to develop before I was 7 years old. I am dyslexic. I can't read, I can't write, or I struggle very hard to do that. But I think of it as the greatest gift I ever got because it forced me to actually build what I call my superpowers. My superpower is asking questions. And so I have to learn not through books. I have to learn through conversation, and I have to learn through questions. And so that's kind of my superpower. I've worked on things like Basecamp, the Patriot Missile Guidance System, Pokemon Mac and Cheese, houses. I've worked at Home Depot. I've worked on QuickBooks. I've worked on MailChimp. I've worked on just about the only thing I said I didn't work on before was insurance. And since then I've worked on insurance. So I'm pretty sure I've worked on just about everything under the sun. And part of it is because of my ability to ask questions, and we'll get to that, right? But in doing all that work, again, you got to remember, 18 years old, barely getting into college. I'm basically illiterate at this point. And I meet this gentleman right here. Does anybody know who that gentleman is? Dr. Deming. Dr. Deming is the father of quality. He was 85 and I was 19 years old. And I asked him 52 questions in 22 minutes. He kept track. And he literally labeled me one of the curious kids he has ever met and said, would you be my intern for the summer? I didn't know that would involve me going to Japan and learning basically the lean method and the Toyota production system method for product development. And so in 1985, I basically went over to Japan and learned all these methods and tools to help Ford Motor Company reduce the product development cycle time from 72 months to 36 months. So think of, I'm on the front lines, just grinding, right? But through my years, I basically have had all these different mentors: Clay Christensen, Jason Fried, Lauren Lackey, Genichi Taguchi, Gene Wright. Some of you might know Gene Wright down here. But one of the things is I have 4 children. And when the youngest child moved out, I have all these notebooks. I have over 800 volumes of notebooks from my entire life. And I literally said, all right, I'm going to order the dumpster and we're going to put it in the dumpster. And my wife said, no, you can't do that. I'll only let you put it in the dumpster if you turn through every single page of every notebook one more time. And out of that, I end up writing a book. Because at some point I realized that I knew nothing. And these people poured their knowledge into me. And so one of the reasons why I love to do these talks is because I get to resurrect the knowledge from these people that taught me along the way. Dr. Deming is one of them. We're going to talk about a little bit of the things of process and basically understanding everything is caused, right? We're going to talk about Clayton Christensen and disruptive innovation and be my co-architect on the jobs to be done theory. We're going to talk about Genichi Taguchi, who taught me how to prototype to learn, which is very different than prototyping to verify. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then Dr. Willie Moore was she was the first African-American woman to graduate with a PhD in particle physics from the University of Michigan. And she taught me how to look at things from so many different perspectives and really, really important. And so the essence of this book is really the 5 skills of innovators and entrepreneurs. It's like if I took and put the best entrepreneurs or innovators in the corner, like what skills do they have? And it's these 5. One is they have empathetic perspective. They can see things from other people's point of view, and they can abandon their own point of view as they look at things. Another thing they can do is they can actually uncover demand. They understand where struggling moments lie and how to do it. We're going to dive deep into this one. There's another one about cause and effect, and that nothing is random and everything is caused. Fourth one is really about prototyping to learn. And the last one is which most people hate to do, but it's the reality of building good product, which is how do you identify and manage trade-offs? Most of the time, that's why our products never make it, because we actually don't know how to identify and manage those trade-offs. Today, I'm going to dive deep into uncovering demand. Just this one, because it's like I can give an hour talk on each one of them. I could do an hour talk on all 5 of them, but I'll never give you enough. This is the meaty one, right? So, foundations. This statement that Clay made to me in 1995 rocked me so deeply that it literally changed my whole trajectory in life. And the point is that questions create spaces in the brain for solutions to fall into. And there was a lie that I was told in business school, right? The lie was very simple. Build it and they will come. We actually have a movie about it, right? Feel the Dreams, right? It's a lie. It doesn't work, right? And so for the first 3-4 years of my life, I built on that premise and I realized it's not true. And so the reason why this question is so powerful to me is like, what question does somebody ask themselves to say, today's the day I need a new mattress? Today's the day I need a new CRM. And it all starts with, this is the impetus. It's the struggling moment that causes them to create a space. Because if they don't ask a question, there's no space in their brain for them to see your product. That's the most important piece, right? The other thing, having worked on so many different things, is that for me, the foundational piece is the struggling moment is the seed for all innovation, for all new products. If your customer's not struggling, they can't see you. You can try to make them like, to me, the worst compliment I could get on a new product is, oh, that's so cool. Because that means they don't have a freaking clue what to do with it, right? They have no articulation of it. And so part of it is to realize that for me, every innovation has to be going towards a struggling moment, not a pain, not a problem, but something they struggle with. And struggle, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about what that means, okay? So here's the basic premise. That people don't buy products, they hire them to make progress in their life, right? And the way that I think about this is, if this is the old way of doing something, and this is the new way of doing something, first of all, nobody really likes to change. We all think we want to change, but the reality is we don't. And so there has to be some forces at play. And so the first thing that has to be there is you have to be at an edge where you want to go somewhere else and you don't want to be here. If there's no push to make you leave this thing, you will literally keep doing A for the rest of your life. But here's the thing is, this is where people complain a lot, right? And if they complain, but they have no idea what to do, this is what I call bitching ain't switching, right? They complain, but the moment that they see the idea on the other side, they have an idea of what progress looks like. It then enables me to actually figure out what to go build. And so part of it is to realize, like, so think of it this way, is if this is a river, how many different ways can I get across this river? Thousands. I can build a boat. I can build a bridge. I can dig a tunnel. I can get a helicopter. I can teach you to swim. I can get a dock. I can, like, on and on and on. But one thing I learned in Japan was they basically said, I want you to understand what the customer wants without telling me what it is. And so the way that I ended up, so it's what they called it, technology agnostic requirements of the customer. And what that means is, if I understand why they're here and why they want to leave, and I understand what they want to do on the other side, I can then come to figure out what is the best method by which to get them to cross that river. And so by understanding context and outcome, it actually helps describe the value that people are trying to gain, the progress they're trying to make. Okay? So To unpack this, there's three key frameworks. One is called supply side, demand side. Another one is called the forces of progress. And the third one is called the timeline. So I want to start with supply versus demand. This is one of those moments in my life where I realized I actually don't understand anything. Because the way that I was taught to build was that if you think of sorry, I put that in my pocket and I shouldn't have. Go. The supply side is really where we have companies, brands, and products. This is the stuff that I love to build stuff. So to me, I grew up on this supply side of the world. And it turns out that the demand side of the world is where people reach over to the supply side and pull stuff into their lives. And most of the time we think about how do we push product to people as opposed to understand how people pull things into their lives. The other part is that I realized that there's a wall between the supply side and the demand side. And I think of that wall as 10 feet thick and 100 feet high, almost like the Berlin Wall, the Great China Wall. But it's this aspect of we try to think about this other side from this, but we actually can't see through it. So we either climb on top of it or we basically drill a hole through it. We might see a little piece of it, but we never see demand in its kind of raw form, right? And so again, the way I was taught to build was I have a business system that produces a product. That product has features and benefits, has experiences and attributes. I build specs out of it. And ultimately I can build products. But typically what I would do is I would actually climb up on this wall and look down and look over the customer and say, and I define markets and segments and personas and leads, right? But ultimately, why does somebody actually pull this product into their lives? What causes them to say, today's the day I need a new CRM, right? It's not random. And so you start to realize it's a very different mechanism. And so most people say they're customer-centric, but they're not, they're customer-centric through their product because they only talk about the customer from their product's point of view. But how do you talk about the customer without your product in their life? And so that's the thing, is that you start to realize that this side of the world works with, there's always some current product. Doing nothing is something, by the way. And there's some context that's wrapped around it that creates a struggling moment. If there's no struggling moment, they'll just keep doing what they've been doing. And once they struggle, they start to create new desired outcomes and they start to look for candidates. But nothing is perfect. Nothing is cheap enough. Nothing is fast enough. Nothing is good enough. And so ultimately, as consumers, they have to make trade-offs. Most of the time, consumers will say they want it all, but they can never have it all. And so part of this is by understanding the trade-offs they make, they need to reflect the trade-offs we make in the product side. And to be honest, the consumer literally climbs up this wall and looks down and sees products and brands on that side, and they don't know how half the stuff, nobody knows how a car works, right? Nobody knows about the technical ways in which a lot of the products that they buy work, but they actually understand the progress they're trying to make with that product. And that's the key, right? And so ultimately, for me, when I start building and innovating, innovators start on this side of the world and realize that the requirements have to come from here, not from basically the supply side. So a good example of this is I worked in the early 2000s with a guy by the name of Scott Cook. Scott Cook worked at Intuit, and we found this anomaly of people using Quicken to run their small business. And we're like, why in the world would somebody be using Quicken to run their small business? And so we went and interviewed some people around it. And ultimately we realized that there was virtually no really good small accounting packages that were out there. And so Scott had the idea of taking two teams. One team was a team of accountants who says, how do we actually build the best accounting software from the accountant's perspective? And I was on the other team of like, how do I build the best accounting package from basically the small business perspective? And what we learned was something kind of amazing, is that if I built the best accounting package that the accountants wanted to do to basically run the business, no small business would actually ever use it. Because most small businesses don't want to hire somebody to run their books. They want to make it easy enough that they can do it. If they're going to hire somebody, they're going to hire another painter. They're going to hire another baker. They're going to hire somebody else. And so what we learned is that it didn't have to be the best accounting package. It just had to be good enough, better than nothing. And it turns out that there were two main reasons why people basically bought QuickBooks. Is they had problems getting paid, sending out invoices, or paying their vendors. right? That's what caused people to get an accounting system. And then after they got that, then they would learn, oh, I've got payroll problems. Oh, I've got a credit card problem. Oh, I've got expenses I got to be able to do. Oh, I've got taxes. And so you started to realize that they literally walked and looked at all the struggling moments that small businesses had. And instead of the roadmap being features they were building, the roadmap was about the struggling moments they were going to address, right? Here's the thing is this, the way Scott would say it is he goes, it's half the features at twice the price. It's a $9 billion business at this point in time. How many people use QuickBooks? Do you love it? No, you hate it. I know you hate it. It's not that you hate QuickBooks, you hate accounting. It's not QuickBooks has nothing to do with it. So this is where, again, most people say, if we make the product better and people like it more, they'll use it more. Not true. Liking has nothing to do with it. It's about the progress they're trying to make, right? So one of the other companies I worked with on this was Casper. You guys know the mattress company, right? So here's the thing. How hard is it to buy a mattress? Has anybody bought a mattress recently from a store? How hard was it? More challenging than you want it to be. It's typically you're walking into a room with 50 to 100 mattresses. There's usually 3 people in the store that are salespeople. You're by yourself and you have no idea what you're looking at. And you actually the bed doesn't work, but you have no idea, what do I need it? Just so many questions and you're so afraid, right? So one of the things we realized is that at the struggling moment was not actually the mattress, it was buying the mattress. And so what we started to realize is all we had to do is make it good, better, best. Single, full, queen, king. 12 SKUs, vacuum sealed, shipped to your house. It created it's $1 billion in sales. And most people would say that market did not actually have room for a new player. But what they did is they went after all the people who wanted to do mattress but couldn't figure out how to buy it. So they didn't actually steal share. They created growth in the category by going after something called non-consumption. And so part of this is to realize, as an engineer, I was taught to build the best product ever. And what I realized is I actually don't have to build the best product ever. I have to build the best product that fits these requirements, which is typically half as good as what I think it should be. That's how I've worked on so many things so fast. So to be honest, it's all about starting with the demand side and then figuring out how our supply side can deliver on this. If we actually build it here, we end up having all these features we can do, but the fact is we don't know the customer will value them or not. The other problem I have is that when I build a product over here, without thinking about this, I got to then go find of the 8 billion people in the world who want my product, which makes sales now impossible. But if I start with the problem, I start with the struggling moment, I start with the outcomes they're seeking, the solution becomes way, way easier. So this is the one thing I would tell you. If you leave this presentation and only remember one thing, it should be this. The struggling moment is the seed for all innovation, not only for us as innovators, but for our customers, for them to innovate. So sometimes it's okay for you to create a struggling moment for them because it forces them to start to think about what they want to do next, right? And so, and the real fact is Ted Levitt came up with this in 1960. People don't want a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole. But in Japan, I learned something a little better called the 5 whys. Why do I want a drill? I want a plug. Why do I want a plug? Why do I want a hole? I want a plug. Why do I want a plug? I want a lamp. Why do I want a lamp? I want to read better. You know what? I'm going to invent the Kindle, right? So this is where we're so myopic to our product that we're literally looking at all these different things. Think of walking into Lowe's and looking at the drills. They have no idea that the average drill only works 93 minutes in its life, right? And that the notion between 20 volts and 24 volts, I don't really care. And they're trying to make all this differentiation on things that don't matter. And so part of it is to actually realize we need to take a step back from our product to see how the customer views it, right? So 2 more frameworks, and then we're going to get to some stories. Forces of progress. So one of the things that I did, I call it a jobcation, which is a job I could do with one hand tied behind my back after I had done a startup and I was exhausted, right? I usually go find a job that people love me to work there. I can do it, but I can work 9 to 5 and just kind of rest and rebuild myself, if you will, right? So I built houses. Think of it as we built houses for first-time home buyers, divorced family with kids, and downsizers. Think of like your parents, right? And so the forces of progress are this thing of like, what would cause, so first of all, nobody randomly buys a house, right? Can we all agree to that? Nobody randomly buys a house. It's not an impulse purchase. It's nothing that's going on. And so part of it is to realize that we had to actually understand what causes people to say, today's the day they want to buy a new house. And so the first thing is there's a struggling moment that happens, and it starts with a push of the situation. What would be pushing your parents to say, today's the day, like, we need to get out of this house? I'm sorry? What does that mean? Unpack it a little bit. What? So they have stairs that are up and down. It's like, and to be honest, we're in Detroit. So all of a sudden they don't want to do the cut the grass. They don't want to shovel the snow, right? They want to travel more, but it's all about the current house and kind of how it's limiting them in what they're doing. If they don't have a struggle here, there's no way they can actually see my condo, right? So once they actually start to realize that, and they realize one of their friends bought a condo, all of a sudden they go to the condo and look at it, and it creates what we call pull. The things that they're, oh my God, this kitchen is amazing. Oh my God, we don't have to put on a new roof. Look at this basement. It's huge because it's a ranch. All of a sudden, it's like you start to realize that there's some pull to do it. And again, you can talk about this as pain and gain, but this is really context and outcome. It's what is the outcome they're really seeking. Now, I call this the fuel. This is the things that fuel people to change. But like any good system, there's friction. And there's two kinds of friction. There's the friction of basically the anxiety of the new. They look at my condo and they go, where's the grocery store? Who are my neighbors? What am I going to do with all my stuff? How can I sell my home? You start to hear all these objections wrapped around it. That's the beginning of the friction. The other part of the friction is the thing they love about the current. This is where we raise the kids. Where are the kids going to stay when they come to visit? Because we don't have 4 bedrooms anymore. And so you start to realize your parents aren't going to move unless the push and pull are greater than the anxiety and habit, right? So the reason why this is important so this is how I actually build. I grew the home builder 400% in 18 months. And it wasn't about adding more. So the way I was taught in business school was just to add more features. If I just add more features, they'll actually buy it. It turns out the more features I add, the more I confuse them and the less they bought. But what I did do is I realized there's a couple of anxiety points that they had. One of the anxieties was, how are we going to move? I've got a 4,000, 3,000, 3,500 square foot home with all the crap that I've been accumulating for literally years. I haven't been in the basement in at least 2.5 years because I just really don't want to go down there. And the reality is like, how am I going to move? So what I did is I increased the price of the condo, but I also added basically moving and 2 years of storage and a place to sort their stuff when you came to visit so they could get rid of it. It increased my sales 22% in 3 months, and it was sustainable. And so most people could say, well, it's a feature, but it's not a feature of the house. It's a feature of the move, right? So part of this is to realize that there's many, many things that people want, but ultimately they're going to make trade-offs, and we have to be able to figure that out. And so I always think of this is the gold mine. This is where if I can actually reduce this friction, I don't actually have to create more push or more pull. If I reduce friction, people will turn. And so part of it is understanding those anxieties they have and how that works. So that's called the forces of progress. Excuse me. Again, I just want to emphasize, so one of the lies I tell myself is nothing is random. I know things are random, but I choose to say, the guy sitting next to me on the airplane didn't randomly end up there. Somehow the universe is telling me I need to talk to them, right? It's just a cause and effect for me, right? So the other part is when people buy a house, right? They go through a process to do that. How they buy, not how we sell, but how they buy. And it falls into this thing of first thought, passive looking, some event that causes me to go active looking, deciding, buying, consuming, satisfaction, right? And to be honest, this is one of those things where I didn't see it in the beginning, but as I realized it, it's just universally true across every product I've ever worked in. But the way to think about it is like, again, the engineer in me, sorry, but these are systems. What happens in first thought? How do I actually create the space? So this is one of those things where I go back to Clay's quote, questions create spaces in the brain for solutions to fall into. So for example, at Casper, one of the questions we asked was, how many bottles of ZzzQuil do you need to take before you realize you need a new mattress? 17% increase in sales, right? So part of this is to realize, like, one is part of marketing's job is to help create the space in the brain. And then ultimately, once they have the space in the brain, now they can learn. They can learn about the problem. They can learn about the solution space. But ultimately, if they're not learning about it, then they're not going to do anything about it. So part of this is to actually help people learn. And then once they get to the point of like, all right, I'm willing to go look, this is where I hate this phase. This is the kid in the candy store. Oh my God, I want this, I want that. Oh my God, I can have this because I want it all, right? And when you ask people, and most of the time when we interview people about products and we want to say, tell me what you want, we're interviewing them here. And it's just, oh my God, granite countertops. I want stainless steel appliances. I want a Energy Star compliant house, like all these things. But what happens is between active looking and deciding, they got to make a bunch of trade-offs. And this is the most important part because nobody gets it all, ever. Very rare. I don't think I've ever seen it. And so part of it is to understand, I had literally 100% of my people, when I surveyed them before, would you like an Energy Star compliant house? They all said yes. But when they realized it was $27,000 and the finished basement was $27,000, 100% of them bought the finished basement, right? And so this is the thing, is that context creates the value. It's the context wrapped around it that actually helps them decide what to do. And so part of this is by understanding what are the variables that cause people to change, we then can design to those standards. And so it's, again, being able to take a step back. So by understanding the forces and the timeline, I can actually then figure out how to change both product, marketing, sales, strategy, et cetera. So this is what I would call foundational research. This is what I call hypothesis building research. So the one thing that I didn't understand very early on in my career is most research is about hypothesis proving research. You have to be smart enough to have a hypothesis. Again, remember, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. I'm good at questions, but I have no idea why somebody bought a house. And can I guess? Sure, but I know I'm wrong. And so part of this is how do I actually understand what causes people to do things, right? So now let's talk through some case studies. Where are we at time-wise? 12:30, we're good? I'm all right. I need a drink though. Am I going too fast? All right. All right, here we go. Case studies. First one's a fun one, especially after lunch. But one of the things I worked on was Snickers. Everybody know what a Snickers is? Has everybody eaten a Snickers? Got it, right? Here's the thing. Got a call from a friend basically saying, hey, I work on the Snickers team. Sales are flat. I hear you're pretty good at innovation. Would you mind coming in and talking to us about what we could do? The week before, I'm literally working on the Patriot missile guidance system, right? And I'm like, sure, I need a break. I'll go on. So I go talk to him. And the thing is he starts to talk about, well, sales are flat and we got to beat Milky Way. I'm like, it's both the same company. You both make the same thing. Yeah, I know, but I won't get my bonus if we don't actually do this other stuff. We're like, okay. So what happens is we sit down and they walk me through everything. First of all, I go to the plant because again, I'm from Detroit, making stuff. Turns out that both products are made on the same line. Turns out that they have the same chocolate, the same caramel. One has peanuts, one doesn't. Like, holy crap. I'm like, this is hard. And I couldn't figure it out. And so what happened is, and you look at this back and forth and they sit next to each other and they compete with each other. I'm like, okay. And so I spent a whole day there and I literally had nothing. I'm like, I have no idea what to do. So I'm like, you know what? My friend goes, I know you're just going to go. You'll spend the weekend thinking about it. You'll come up with something Monday. I'm like, yeah, right. So I flew out of Newark. Big mistake. Anybody who flies out of Newark knows we're delayed we're like, why are we, it's beautiful. There's nothing that's still delayed. Don't know why. So I'm standing in line at the kiosk and the guy in front of me buys a Snickers. And I'm like, wonder why I did that. So I buy my stuff and I follow him. And he sits down and I sit down, like he sits there and I sit down over here. And, I'm not too creepy, but creepy enough. And he literally, I watch him, he unwraps it in like 3 bites, mainlines it, just puts it down, opens his laptop, starts working away. I'm like, and it turns out like we're both on the same flight and we're delayed like 2.5, 3 hours. And I look, I'm like, did you just have a Snickers bar? He's like, yeah, a little guilt in his voice. I'm like, well, what's going on? He's like, I got to get all this work done. I can't do it when I'm on the plane because I got to basically do it this one way. And like, okay, it's like, if I get this done before I get on the plane, then I can go to my son's baseball game. I'm like, great. But why is Snickers? He goes, I guess I'm just lazy. I'm like, but we're here. He goes, I could have gotten a sandwich, but then I would get my hands all greasy. And then I tried to type. I can't do that. Like, I just needed something so I could get back to work really, really quickly. I'm like, cool. And finally, he just looked at me and says, dude, I'm trying to get some work done. Leave me alone. I'm like, okay. So I go back to the kiosk, right? And I just start to look at all these things and I start to hear people and I start to see a pattern. Missed the last meal. Stomach is growling. I need to do something and get it done. I don't want to actually make this a big deal. I need to get the food in so I can just keep doing my work that I have to do. Milky Way, on the other hand, turns out to be completely different. Milky Way is typically before or after, to be honest, it's after an emotional experience. Could be good, could be bad. It's about having a moment to yourself. It's about actually feeling better about something. Because if you think about the first bite of a Milky Way is what? It's soft and you basically take maybe 2 bites and it's liquid and you drink it down and it's like coated your mouth. It's like, oh man, that's amazing, right? Snickers is the other way. Hard ball, swallow it, put it in your stomach, absorbs the acid, keep going. Here's the crazy part where I keep losing this clicker because I put it in my pocket. Turns out they don't compete at all. When you start to think of the last time you had a Snickers, it was like, oh, it competed with a Red Bull or a coffee or a sandwich or an apple. But nobody thought of a Milky Way and vice versa. And you start to realize like a Milky Way competes with ice cream and a brownie. My favorite was an interview I did on somebody who said, yeah, I had a really bad day. I was going to go for a run. And then I saw the Milky Way. I'm like, oh my God. And when you think about it, this is all about endorphins. This is all about taking time. This is all about having a moment to take a break. This is about literally keeping me going through a busy, draining moment. And so 2 products which you think compete against each other in the traditional supply side sense, because they're made in the same plant, they have the same ingredients. From the demand side, they don't even compete at all. That is the first thing, is that, so who you think you compete with is very different than who you really compete with. So at Casper, we competed with ZzzQuil and mattress toppers, not other mattresses. And so part of this is changing that perspective around it. Out of that, so I helped on the product side. This is the ad that the creative agency came up with, which was brilliant.
Here, phone. White phone.
Mike, what's your deal, man?
Come on, man. You've been riding me all day.
Mike, you're playing like Betty White out there.
That's not what your girlfriend said. Free.
Okay,
Use Snickers. Better?
Where?
Like, eat it.
Just on.
Really?
You're not you when you're hungry. Snickers satisfies.
The consumer came up with that line. We didn't come up with that line. They basically said, I'm not me when I'm hungry. God, they came up with the phrase hangry. Like they have it all inside them. We just have to learn how to listen for it. The important part of that commercial, though, is 2 things. Is it's not overblown. When they get the Snickers, what happens to the person? They turn back into themselves. They don't turn back into a better person of themselves. They just turn back into themselves. That's the goal. That's the progress. And so part of this is being able to know how to match the things. And if we would have said, oh, you turned into a professional player, all of a sudden it's like, we're now making promises we can't keep. The promise is I just can play the way I play. Get back to me. That's the key, right? How does this relate to you guys? What's your takeaway from this story? Anybody? Come on. Their language matters the most for sure. And to be honest, I call it resonance. A lot of times we end up getting their language and we modify it to make it prettier or more appealing. But the reality is the more we can actually get their language as the way they specifically say it, it will resonate with them. And the more they think you know their problem, the more they assume you know the solution. And so being that, yep.
Oh,
That's right. Or what they're trying to do and what they're trying to achieve. And most of that happens in their head, right? And so a lot of times most purchases happen before people try anything. And so part of it is what are they worried about in their head and what are they hoping to make in their head? And so that's the other part of this is, I think the other part of the question is what we think seem like obvious competitors aren't necessarily obvious competitors in the consumer's mind. And that's the thing we have to realize, that most of you, if you're in software, most of you compete with Excel and you don't even know it, right? And you don't want to admit it, but the reality is most people are moving from Excel to you, right? So let me give you another example. Where am I time-wise? Oh, good. Okay. How many people know of Intercom? Who's Intercom? Chat wheel, basically a customer service kind of place. Well, Des basically started this in 2010 with a guy by the name of Owen McCabe. And this was their third startup. And one of the things that he was wrestling with is every time he tried to basically build a software company and scale it, he'd have to buy these pieces of marketing automation and live chat and email, help desk, all these different things. And ultimately, as they scaled the business, none of those databases talked to each other. And so the nightmare of kind of going through scale and then trying to sell was basically almost repackaging all those products together. He goes, I want to build something from scratch that helps people from the beginning be able to kind of have all the data in one place. And so they called it Intercom, like one place that basically we can talk to the customer and you can see everything. And so that was their fundamental premise, right? And so 2010, 2012, they built it. This was the positioning of the product, which was manage your customers' information from cradle to grave. This was their vision of it. And to be honest, for year one, 2012, 3.5 million. Year two, they got to 5 million, but they felt like there was something wrong. So Des goes, would you mind interviewing a few people just to see why in the world people are hiring us? So we went off and did it. We only did 10. Doesn't take a lot of people. This is not a statistical exercise. This is a cause and effect exercise, which is about understanding the variables. And so we went off, and when we interviewed people, we found 4 very distinct reasons why people bought it. One was the first one here, acquire, which was people are coming to our site. They're there, but they're not converting. So we use Intercom to help us convert people from basically being on site, in the site to basically becoming a customer. Like, okay, got it. This group here was like, no, we got people coming in droves. We're not that problem. Our problem is people aren't coming back and they're not engaged in using it enough. So we use Intercom to actually figure out where they're struggling, where they have to do it. We can message in between. We can basically get up and we can use it to help us engage our customers. Turns out this is bought by marketing. Turns out this is bought by customer success, right? Then we found this little small one, which was these guys in product. Oh, we buy it because it shows us where the customer is actually struggling on the way, and it helps us decide what features to add, right? And then there's this last one, which baffled us all, was like, oh yeah, we're using it to manage our support process. And we're like, what? It's not even designed for that. Well, how? And they showed us how they hacked it, and it was kind of amazing. But we found these 4 really different pathways of how people use the product. And so the first thing is that when you bought Intercom, you could do any of those things. You got everything for one price, $99 a month. You got everything, right? And so what we found, though, is the other thing is that if somebody bought it for acquire, they never used it for anything else. And so the first thing we realized is maybe you've got 4 products here, not one. And so the first thing they did is, we finished this work at the end of Q1 of 2014, started in Q13 2013 and beginning of 14. And so within 1 one iteration, the first thing they started to realize is like, what we're going to talk about is not the product. We're going to talk about the context that people find themselves in. So like, I've got a lot of emails where it's almost like the wheels are off the wagon is what we heard here, right? And then what they did is they basically started to talk about the outcomes. And so before they actually talk about the product, they just started to actually buy the problem-aware language. So think of it this way, is they used to buy the features and benefits language for their website. Now they buy the problem-aware language, which was a third the price, right? And so now people became aware. And if they were in this situation, they would say, oh my God, I want to do this. And so what they did is they started Q2, they literally went back and said, you know what, let's just run this notion. We're going to take 5% of our traffic and move it to this whole notion of just see if we offer packages, if people will buy them, right? And it turns out that all of a sudden people could figure this out. The interesting part is they insisted there was another job here of observe. And my language was, it's not a job because people aren't making progress doing it. They just become aware that they have a problem. These are problems that they will solve. This is just making them aware. So this is really not a job. They basically, within 6 months, they basically moved it to product, 4 different products. Here's the way they did it though, is they didn't build it from the ground up. They literally took the platform they had and turned off features that were only relevant to the set of that specific job or use case. So it ended up being this way. The other thing they did is they broke this out to say, Acquire actually competes with who? HubSpot. Support competes with Zendesk. So they actually made themselves 20% less than any of the bigger competitors to say, we can get you started in it. Oh, by the way, if you've got this problem, we can solve it. But with them, we can sell you these other products as well. So just that simple positioning change helped them grow 5x in customers and another 3x in revenue on top of it, because now they could sell them multiple products. So they went from 5 million to 75 million in 18 months, right? And so, and to be honest, if you look up Matt Hodges, he's got a great talk on how he talks about the jobs to be done and how they used it. What's so interesting is every time I work with startups, I have to sign almost like a take my firstborn child if I talk about it scenario, right? And the reality is they started talking about, they had me write a book, and finally I had to get them to sign a release that I could finally talk about it because they were talking about it so much, but I still had to give away my firstborn child. To be honest, some days I did want to get rid of them, but that's a different story. But once they got that, they did their Series B, right? Series B, they actually split the thing down the middle and saying half is going to go to tech, but half is going to go to actually learning more and more about the jobs to be done. So they built a conference set where they actually went around the world and hired both experts and held conferences with startups to say, how do we help you become experts in these things? How do I onboard better? How do I actually get retention? How do I actually do conversion better? All those kinds of things. And they built out basically all their tool sets around that whole notion. Right. So what's interesting is then they did their Series C. And in Series C, they got rid of the Matt Hodges, who was the marketing guy, and they brought in somebody from the outside, and they went back to traditional kind of marketing and positioning, which was live chat, onboarding, customer support, kind of more traditional feature benefit stuff. And sales actually started to decline. By 2019, they went back to acquire, engage, support, right? And they did their Series D at the end, and they ended up getting about a $1.25 billion valuation on it. Today, they're one of the leaders in customer support success, onboarding. They're literally one of the leaders in AI. And they, again, use, like QuickBooks, they use, their roadmap isn't feature sets. The roadmap is struggling moments that they know the customer is going to have later. Because half the time we're building features that we don't even know what we should be doing next November, though that's already on the roadmap, right? What's the relevance of this story to you guys? Yep. That's right. So the thing to me is the key was they needed to build it in their vision to get it out. But once they actually figured it out and they started to realize, like, how do we help people more? They went from how do I sell my product to how do I help people? That's when they actually were able to modify the product. It's the humility, the humbleness of being serving people as opposed to trying to convince people you're the best. And that was easier. That's exactly right. It's easier. So let me just see if I can say it better. It's easier to build things people want than try to convince people to want your product. And that's exactly right. Des is a very good friend. And to be honest, they're probably one of the most successful companies that I can talk about in using jobs to be done out there. So I got one more, and this relates to something yucky called sales. But the reality is, like, one of the things I learned very early on is having done 7 startups is sales is the hardest part of every startup. I have to sell founders. I have to sell co-founders. I have to sell employees. I have to sell investors. I have to sell customers. Like, you have to learn how to sell all the time. And to me, the word sell was always about pushy. So I reframed sales as, how do I actually just help people make progress? And how do we reframe it that way? And so this is a company called Autobooks. They're in Detroit. It turns out that they basically provide, does anybody know Autobooks? You guys might know, because fintech, you know a little bit about them. So one of my co-founders is Chris Speck, and he went there and handled the product side. But ultimately, this is a company that basically, if you think of Square and PayPal and Venmo are outside the banking part and everything's handled outside. This is something that you can actually send an invoice off your SMS and it will literally send an invoice that goes right into your bank account. And the reason why that's important is for small businesses like a plumber. I'm going to put a new hot water tank in. I'm going to take a deposit. What would happen is Square or PayPal would actually hold the money for a week, where now the money is actually available instantaneously, right? And so my co-founder, Chris Beck, who is now head of product here, he went off and built it for the small business side. But he asked me if I could help out his partners, which were Kyle Bazzi and Derek Sutton on the sales and marketing side. Because though he had to figure out how to get the small businesses to do it, Kyle and Derek had to figure out how to get the banks to buy into it, which is, again, think of it, the small businesses and the banks are actually at odds. So how do I build a product that both the bank wants and the small business want, right? So I sit down with Kyle, and Kyle comes from this whole notion of like, hey, I have a product. I need to talk about features and benefits. I'm going to walk in and have a very clear process. And I'm over here going like, no, you need to talk about their demand and what are they struggling with? And he was like, we were just kind of going back and forth. Eventually I got to the point where I said, look, your sales funnel is actually a supply side concept. It's how you want to sell. And the more you look at this sales process, you realize that it's not actually run by sales. It's actually run more by the Church of Finance than it is by sales. Because at the end of a quarter, how can I give a 30% discount to close somebody when our estimates are off? That's the only time I can get a discount. And it's typically not because of sales, it's because of finance. And so you start to realize this is how we want to sell. But the reality is what I said is we need to actually understand how they want to buy. And so ultimately it's flipping this lens from going like, I'm not going to worry about selling. Let's just understand how people want to buy and what progress they're trying to make. And then we'll actually design the sales process. So he was willing to abandon that, right? So one of the things I asked him was, where in the world are you struggling? He goes, oh, dude, it's the demo. I absolutely hate the demo. We have to revamp it every 90 days. We have this is the sales process we have. It has these things, but the demo is like right here is like, that's the key thing. And like, I sit down with all the salespeople at the end of the quarter and we go like, what's going on? And we redesign it. And every quarter we're redesigning it over and over and over again. I'm like, okay. I said, so let's talk, let's sit down and talk with the salespeople. So we start to realize that he's just so frustrated about it because of the way the process is going. I said, let's take a different tack to this. I said, if you've got a demo and they're buying, where are they in their buying timeline? And he looked at me like, huh? I said, no, not your sales process. Where are they in their act of trying to do it? Are they, passively looking, actively looking? He says, oh, they're undecided. I said, so how do you know that? He goes, well, that's what we assume. I said, all right, let me go to a couple demos. So we go to I go the first demo and it's like, it turns out these people are in passive looking. And we're trying to talk about technical details of everything that's trying to happen. And they're literally like, do I need this or not? Give me an example. And you start to realize the demo for for closing is very different than the demo for intro. And at the same time, in passive looking, it's like they want to see all the possibilities. And in the end, they want to actually know that it fits within their tech stack. And so you start to realize like one demo was not going to make it. So we simply said, all right, what we need to do is get the salespeople to ask. By the way, this is a very hard question to get the salespeople to ask. But the question is, where are you in your buying timeline? Because then they go, what are you talking about? And you can explain it. And so we end up building these 3 demos. Demo one was literally an hour with 5 minutes about us talking about the product and 55 minutes talking about them and their struggling moments and why we're even there, to help them understand how they have some space, but how do we actually get them to learn about the product? And to be honest, how do we get them to beg for the next one? The next demo turns out that it had to be a big group. And as it's a big group, I want marketing there. I want the banking operations there. I want this. And if I can't get everybody together, there's no way anybody's going to sell it because I have to go back all the time. And so demo 2 was, look, I'm going to show you all the possibilities. And then I want to know what y'all want. And then demo 3 was actually about bringing them 3 different options so they could make the trade-offs to say, do you want it fast? Do you want it actually to be to this standard or do you want it to that standard? And they were able to decide, right? And so ultimately, the fact is what they did know is if they didn't beg for that demo, they would never have the energy to close the deal ever. So it sounds like it's 3 times more work. Turns out it's not. Because at some point, it's actually doing a lot of the pre-work of what the post-work looks like after you sell because you're getting everybody on board, right? And so the interesting part about this is that Kyle and Derek, CMO, Chief Revenue Officer, went to a trade show and just prototyped this. They literally were at a booth. The booth had 1 monitor on it, and they literally put those 3 things up there. Has anybody here ever been to a banking conference? Holy crap. Like it's pulling teeth trying to get people to even just like look up and give you eye contact, right? It's like, phew. And what you start to realize is Kyle said it best. He goes, I had no idea that we had catnip in the house. I said, what do you mean? He goes, we'd be sitting in the thing and I'd be in the middle of the aisle trying to wrangle people and people would walk by and they'd stop and they'd just look. And Derek, who's the marketing guy, would go, which number? And they go, number 2. And I was like, well, tell me more. And next thing you know, and they started to sell. And so it turns out that this is the language that the banks were using to basically say how they would actually use QuickBooks. And if they didn't have it, or I'm sorry, Autobooks, and if they didn't have it, it's like, we couldn't help you. So instead of trying to push it all the time, they actually figured out when were people ready for our product. And it had to be one of those 3 conditions. So then what we did is we actually built a process that literally as leads came in, right, we'd figure out which job they were in by asking them a series of questions about the context they're in and the outcome they want. And then the salesperson's job was to actually move them through the timeline to help them actually figure out how to purchase. What's interesting is if they didn't have any forces, they did not become a prospect anymore. They became a lead. A prospect has to have forces to make progress. And so it actually took 50% of their prospects and moved them back to leads, to waiting for them to have the forces, allowed them to focus on basically the people who are really had the energy to make the progress. And here's what happens. Here's the big difference I'm sorry, I'm just going to go back. The big difference is this, is that what we got rid of was typically there's marketing and then a handoff, and then there's sales and a handoff. And there's so much friction in these handoffs that you end up spending more time arguing with each other than actually focusing on the customer. And so what they did is they basically said, we need to actually think about, I need marketing's help, not only here, but I actually need it when I'm doing first use. I need marketing's help back over here too. So it's turning and making everybody focus on the progress the customer is trying to make, as opposed to just focusing on doing their part and moving on, right? The other thing we did is we actually changed the comp of the salespeople. 50% of the commission came at close. The other 50% came when they actually made the progress, which we had a metric for, right? So in the last 12 months, 3x on lead conversions, half the time to close, which that blew them all away. The actual aspect of being able to launch faster because they had everybody up front actually did that. And then 6x on bank partners, 9x on small business users, and over 5x on revenue. And it's all by basically realizing like that small business is different than the banks. I got to focus on the banks. I got to align the banks and the small businesses together. It's about lining those things up. And so this method, this approach, you can use for product, you can use for marketing, you can use it for sales. I have a book that I'm working on right now to talk about talent. What causes somebody to leave one company to go to another company? It's not random. It's caused. And 9 times out of 10, it's not you, it's them. So what is it? How do we actually understand how to help people make progress? Right? So here's the end. And then we'll do, oh, I'm right on time. Wow, that's pretty good. 3 tips. Number 1, find struggling moments. I will tell you, like, they're freaking everywhere. You can't miss them, but you have to realize where are the people wanting to do something, but they can't. We call it non-consumption, right? Second one is think about the progress that people are trying to make. This is where, if I have an hour, I'll spend 55 minutes on understanding the problem, the progress they're trying to make. It makes it so much easier to find the solution. And when I have a solution that I can't make work, typically, when I feel like there's way too much energy trying to make it work, I take a step back, go, I don't have the right problem that they're trying to solve. Progress. The last thing is really about trade-offs. Jason Fried says it best, a kick-ass half is better than a half-ass whole. And so most people, we end up adding features and features and features and features. And my belief is that when we add more features, we actually create more anxiety. A 5-in-1 doesn't work as good as a 6-in-1. And you start to realize, like, okay, if it has all these features, like, I don't know if I need all this stuff. And so the more you can understand their struggling moment, the better. Last story. So I had the honor, the privilege, just lucky to sit with this gentleman for 27 years, once a quarter for 4 hours with no agenda. I consider him one of the smartest men in the world. And to be honest, the most humble. I mean, first of all, he was 6'10". He's the kind of guy you go to shake his hand and your hand disappears. You're like, holy crap, that's a big man. And he literally would sit on his desk like a giddy little, like Indian crisscross applesauce style, right? Like just so happy and giddy kind of thing, right? But he asked me one time, he goes, so you've done so many different things. What is your greatest innovation ever? And my response was very simple. My next one, of course. He goes, no. Context. I'm like, oh, here we go. He goes, you're dead. I'm like, wait, what? You're on the pearly gates. He goes, St. Peter has a list. What is on the top of his list that's going to get you into heaven? I'm like, holy crap. Like, wait, what? I'm like, I got to come. I'll come back in a quarter and say it. And I started to think about it. And I'm like, I have to say, I loved working on the Patriot missile guidance system, but I have to tell you, that's probably going to send me to hell. I'm pretty sure it's going to send me to hell. But it was just kind of fascinating. Pokemon mac and cheese is so delicious. I still love it to this day, but I know it's bad for me and that's going to send me to hell. So I'm like, oh, what am I going to come up with? And then I remember this man. He was 85. I'm 20, 21. We're driving around in Des Moines, Iowa, very specifically remembering he had no concept of time. It would always be late running to the airport. We'd have a rental car. This is in the 80s, right? And we'd be running to the airport and I'd be like, oh, God, I got to get, because at the time they didn't have the refuel option. And at Ford, they were very frugal. So you had to go to, so I panicked. Oh God, which side is that damn thing on? And you look in the mirror and like, nope, not there. And you pull up on one side, it'd be the wrong side. And finally you just go, I'm just going to stretch it over to the other side, right? Just make it film. And Deming is in the front seat screaming like, this is a problem. We need to solve this problem. I'm just like, no, we need to get to the airport. I need a beer. Right. And he's just like, no, we got it. So he would never know. He never knew my name. I don't think he could remember names well, but he called me the kid. And he just basically said, we need to get the kid to work on the gas tank problem. And I'm like, no. And in 1987, I got assigned the gas tank problem. And so This is the embarrassing part. This is 1987. This is the Ford Taurus. That's what the gas gauge looked like. It took me, 5 years with a team of, by the way, with a really good team to come back with this little freaking arrow that tells you which side is up. Now, I make no money. It's completely, everybody knows what it is. By the way, half the room is like, what arrow? And they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. The other, because you don't have to remember, the other is like, thank God I got this arrow. But it's something like, I feel like I've saved a bunch of accidents at airport gas stations, and at least made people a little bit less anxious about basically refilling their car because they don't remember which side it's on. So if you want to learn more, I have a podcast called The Circuit Breaker, which is me and my business partner of 24 years, riffing around these kinds of ideas and concepts. I've got 2 books, one called Demand Side Sales, which is the basis of kind of what we did in Autobooks. Learning to Build is the other book. I have another book coming out in October or November around talent and basically helping people figure out where they want to go next in their career.
Thank you for joining us on Build What's Next, Digital Product Perspectives. If you would like to know more about how Method can partner with you and your organization, you can find more information at method.com. Also, don't forget to follow us on social and be sure to check out our monthly Tech Talks. You can find those on our website. And finally, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on any future episodes. We'll see you next time.